G'day, I'm Nick Goldschmidt, winemaker for Goldschmidt Vineyards and Forefathers and Boulder Bank Wines, and today I'm here to talk about clones. I know there's a lot of misconceptions out there about what a clone is, but hopefully I can clear up a little bit about what that means in the plant world today. If we think about, and you may have seen this drawn in one of the other little video clips that we had, we talked about warm fruit, and we talked about cool fruit, and we talked about pineapple, melon, stone fruit. So these are high-end tropical, and as we get a little bit cooler, we head towards pip fruit like apple and pear, citrus, and then we get down to grass, being the coolest of all the fruit elements. We also talked about structure and texture. And if you want to have definitions of those, just perhaps flick back and have a look at one of the other shows that we did describing that. But what happened was, when vineyards were first developed here in California, it was very hard to get Chardonnay and Pinot, etc. So people had to develop themselves. So if you had a block of land and you're growing grapes on it, or your neighbor was growing grapes on it and you wanted to grow grapes, you would actually have to go out to the vineyard, and let's say each one of these crosses was a vine. They're all nicely planted in nice straight rows. We could go out there in the fall and take a cutting. And when I mean a cutting, if you take a stick which has 3 buds on it, so this is a pruning cutting. So this is when we go out in the fall, we go out in December into the vineyard, and we take a stick that's got 3 buds on it, and in the springtime we can take that bud and put it on the rootstock. So a rootstock, and this is going to get a little bit tricky, so hopefully you can follow, but a rootstock is a plant that we have to fight nematodes and phylloxera and other other insects that we have in the soil. We'll take one of these buds, we'll just take it like a chip. It's just a little chip bud. We make a little T in the rootstock, we peel back the cambium, and we slip that little bud in there. And we can grow that into a Chardonnay or a Pinot or whatever little chip varietal that we put in there. So we had a vineyard right next door. We plant our rootstocks, we put our little chip bud on top, and sure enough we can grow Chardonnay too. Well, this worked great until we realized that we had a problem with one of our rootstocks. And for those of you who followed the wine industry for about 15 years, you'll remember that we had a problem with a little insect called phylloxera. And we had planting a rootstock called AXR. AXR rootstock we thought was resistant to phylloxera, but it turned out not to be. So all these vineyards that were planted suddenly started to diminish in vigor and eventually had to be pulled out because the crop loads became so small because of this little insect called a phylloxera. This rootstock, as it turned out, and we're still not quite sure, but we believe that this rootstock, when we put the Chardonnay on top, there was very good compatibility, because we believe now that this AXR rootstock actually had a little bit of Vitis vinifera in it. Vitis vinifera is Chardonnay, Pinot, Merlot, but what we really wanted to be planting was Vitis labrasca, Vitis brillanda airy, and all these other resistant forms of plant resistant to phylloxera. And the only places to get these rootstocks are on the east coast of the US or in China. So when we figured all that out, we came back out, we planted our new rootstock in the ground, and we put our Chardonnay on top. Well, guess what happened? We suddenly had incompatibility, because no longer was this rootstock related to the Chardonnay that we were putting on top. So things started to happen. We started to have virus. Virus started to show up. We had red leaves, we had leaf curl, or we had a smaller crop, we had clusters becoming smaller. And I'm not talking about viruses that make you sick. It's just viruses that occurred naturally in the plant. So the scientists said, well, we can fix this. And there are 2 ways to fix it. The first way is we could go into a glasshouse situation, take the Chardonnay, grow it very rapidly in a glasshouse, take the tip off it, grow that very rapidly, take the tip off that and grow that rapidly. And that's what we call heat treatment, or growing the vine really, really quickly. And as we grow it quickly, we're actually outgrowing the virus that's inherent in that plant. We can then take that tip that is now what we call virus free, put it on the new rootstock, and guess what happens? It worked. The other way to do it, which we could go all the way back out into the vineyard, grab for some reason, this one vine and this one vine and this one vine, for some reason didn't show the virus of everyone else. And we could actually go back out and select those particular vines, take a cutting from that vine, put it on the new rootstock, and generally that started to work. Okay, so hopefully you grasped all of that. So here we go. Let's go back again 30, 40 years. We run out and we plant another vineyard. Suddenly winemakers started showing up in the vineyard. And the winemakers started saying, you know what? This vine, and this vine, and this vine, and this, pick a vine. These vines, these 4 vines in this vineyard tasted more pineapple-y than all the others. So the winemaker said, you know what? I only want my new vineyard to come from these 4 vines. And this was what we call field selection. We went out into the field and we selected the vines that we wanted to plant, and we planted here. And this became a pineapple-y tasting vineyard. We could then go into the vineyard again and say, you know what? These 6 vines are the most pineapple-y tasting. I want to take my next vineyard and only make it from these pineapple vines, pineapple tasting vines. So we planted another vineyard, and this became pineapple squared, or very, very tropical. And we could do the same thing for each one of these characteristics. And we had names for these selections. High in pineapple would have been Spring Mountain or Rude. The melony ones tended to be a selection called C or Wente, was one of the stone fruit ones. Pip fruit was more like Bardo. We had Calera down here. We had all sorts of these, what we call field selections. And this went on really well for about 20 years until we had this issue with the AXR rootstock. So what happened was, when the scientists went out and we produced these little tips that we then put on the new rootstock and showed no virus, when we went out and planted those things, guess what happened? We'd actually removed a lot of the flavor, and all those new Chardonnays that we were producing, even though they had really good compatibility and started growing good crops, we'd actually remove the citrus in the grass and we'd remove the pineapple and the melon. And so we had to go back out and try and mitigate that a bit. We had to go back out and try and find some of the plant material that would still give this. So what is clones and what is field selections? And that's what we're just here to describe. A field selection was when a winemaker would go out in the vineyard and take cuttings from one particular vine or a series of vines and plant them in his new vineyard. And through field selections, we had a huge range. What the definition of a clone is, this is a bit funny, you actually know who your family is. So the definition of a clone is you can go all the way back to one vine or one vineyard and find the designation that all of those cuttings came from. So that's what a clone is. And when we planted clones, we tended to have taken away all these other flavor characteristics. So where we are in terms of Chardonnay and Sauvignon Blanc, etc. these days is we're actually trying to develop clones that also provide some of these other flavors that have subsequently been taken away through this problem that we've had with phylloxera.